President Trump is attempting to fire Federal Reserve Board member Lisa Cook for cause, alleging she committed mortgage fraud. She denies any wrongdoing, and in fact, she's preparing a lawsuit to keep her position. The Federal Reserve issued a statement yesterday asserting its independence. Here's ABC News White House Chief Correspondent Mary Bruce with the latest.
It will now be up to a judge to determine whether Trump's allegations merit Cook's firing, likely setting up another test for the Supreme Court. Cook was appointed by former President Biden, and her term doesn't end until 2038. The Federal Reserve now reasserting its independence, stressing long tenures and removal protections for its members are a vital safeguard to protect the long-term interests of the American people.
So it's one of the things that has been in the news lately, and I actually have a number of questions about how this board is set up and why it's independent, and some of the arguments about why President Trump can't actually fire her. And luckily, we have an expert to join us, and it's Michael Kofoed. He's an assistant professor of economics at the University of Tennessee and a research fellow at the Institute of Labor Economics. Welcome, Dr. Kofoed.
Hi, Holly and Greg. Great to be on the show today.
It's great to have you. So can you just help us understand how this board is put up, why they have 15-year terms, and why it's more independent than other, maybe what we consider government agencies?
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a quick ethics disclosure, I'm also a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and receive a small stipend for them for my services. So just to be clear on that, and served on the New York Fed Community Board before. And that kind of links into your question. So the Federal Reserve is the most unique American institution, especially on central banking. Our founders have always been worried about concentrated power, special economic power. So the Fed is actually a conglomerate of 12 independent Federal Reserve banks that exist across the United States. One fun historical fact is to win the last Senate vote from the senator in Missouri. So St. Louis and Kansas City both have Federal Reserve banks. Mm-hmm. But the Federal Open Market Committee, how that's composed is you have the chair of the Fed and the other Fed governors, of which there are 7, and then that committee is then augmented by the president of the New York Fed, who always gets to vote, kind of the flagship of the Federal Reserve System, and then 4 rotating presidents of the other 11 banks. And they're the ones that increase or decrease the money supply, which then correspondingly increases or decreases the short-term interest rate. Why do they have such long terms? Well, one problem we've had throughout global history is that there needs to be a separation between what we call fiscal policy, which is taxes and spending on a government budget, which is set by Congress and the president, and monetary policy, which controls how much money is released into the economy. In countries that don't have this, kind of blood-brain barrier there, it's very tempting for legislators to run huge deficits, and then when the bond market refuses to fund those, order the central bank to print the money to then fund that deficit. And essentially in some of these countries like Germany with war reparations or Argentina, they kind of try to bribe their voters with large government spending and then print the money to fund it, and then you have extreme hyperinflation as a result.
So, Professor Kofoed, tell our listeners how, so this is a 15-year commitment or 15-year appointment, how that appointment is made, who approves it, and under what circumstances a person can be removed.
Excellent. Yeah, so a lot of people say, well, the Fed is this fourth branch of government that has no accountability. That's not actually true. Each of these governors have a 14-year term, and they stagger those terms so that they expire every 2 years. So every president usually gets to pick 2. And so why we want them to be so long and we want them to be staggered is that way that it's not like it's a cabinet agency where one president comes to town, removes the entire Federal Reserve Board, and then puts their cronies onto the board to then mess with that monetary policy independence. If a president would come and say, I'm going to put, root beer in all the water fountains, and since the bond market won't fund that, I'm going to then order the Fed to print the money to pay for that. And that's going to cause economic damage via inflation. So we stagger these So then the president nominates someone, and then just like any other official, that person's confirmed by the United States Senate, and then they are expected then to look at data, look at market trends, and operate politically independent from some of the debates that we might be having.
So it seems to me like it is political, and we've seen President Trump remove a number of people from their positions. Why is this one different? Why are some people saying he doesn't have the authority to do that?
Yeah, so what we've seen is President Trump technically hasn't removed anyone yet. They had one Fed governor unexpectedly resign within the last couple of months. So that created a vacancy. So, 14 years is a long commitment. One of those people might say, I want to retire, I want to do something else. He's also put a lot of pressure on Jerome Powell, who is a governor but serving as the chair of the Fed, because he doesn't like that Jerome Powell hasn't reduced the interest rates as quick as he would like. What's different about the Lisa Cook example is we've never had a president in the middle of their term, because Governor Cook was appointed a couple of years ago, say that they're going to fire that person. Now, it says within cause, and so what's going on is they're claiming that they have some evidence of mortgage fraud. We would hope that that evidence would play out in a court of law, but they're using that as an excuse to fire this person so they could potentially get 2 nominees on the Fed board quickly outside of the normal cycle.
Was there something particularly troubling about her nomination? I think the Senate actually voted 50-50, and Kamala Harris split the tie to put her on the board. I would just assume this is one of those positions that people just sort of rubber stamp. But was there something about her particular nomination that caused some concern?
Yeah, I remember these debates well. So, there was 2 one is that the Senate has become much more polarized. There's very rare that we get these kind of unanimous votes as before. Also, one of the things that they try to draw from is there's this misconception that only monetary policy is the only thing that the Fed does. It also does banking regulation. It also does research into every branch of economics. And so Dr. Cook's research was studying, for example, the effects of racial discrimination after the Civil War on patents and research. And so she is more of an economic historian than a pure monetary expert. And so there was some discussion on whether we want just a pure person who does monetary policy or someone from kind of the various flavors of the economics profession.
So one last question. Time goes so quickly. She is saying she's not going to leave. Can she do that as well? Like, can she be dragged out?
So this is where the law gets maybe a little bit unclear, because it says with cause. And there's some accusations that maybe the White House is grasping at straws to find any cause on any of these governors to be forced out. And so I think what the trade-off is going to be is whether or not they can actually prove with evidence that there was mortgage fraud. And 2, what does that mean for that political independence if Fed governors can be removed at whim? A Fed is very, very careful to defend that independence because of these dire consequences from when it loses it. And so it would probably not be in the Fed's best interest to have someone leave when those accusations there's been no indictments and those accusations haven't been proven.
Thank you, Michael. That was Michael Kofoed, Assistant Professor of Economics at the University of Tennessee and Research Fellow at the Institute of Labor and Economics.